At 15, she was kicked out in a storm because of a lie. She had no idea that Get Out turns into a billion-dollar empire. 15-year-old Imani Richardson stood in the rain, her younger brother's hand trembling in hers, watching her mother's boyfriend slam the door in her face. "You're nothing but trouble," he'd shouted, "stealing from hard-working people. Get out and don't come back." But Imani hadn't stolen anything. The truth was locked inside with the woman who should have believed her. What happened next would prove that sometimes the cruelest betrayals forge the strongest foundations, and that a girl dismissed as worthless would become the woman who redefined power itself. Before we dive into this incredible journey, I need you to do something for me. If stories of resilience, redemption, and triumph speak to your soul, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, don't just scroll past this. This channel brings you real stories that inspire, that challenge you, that remind you why human spirit is unbreakable. And while you're at it, smash that like button. It takes 2 seconds, but it means everything. Then drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Georgia, New York, Manchester, Netherlands, Lagos, wherever you are, I want to know. Because stories like Imani's belong to all of us, and your engagement keeps these stories alive. Now, let's get into it. The rain came down in sheets that October evening in Atlanta, the kind that turned streets into rivers and made visibility nearly impossible. Imani stood on the front porch of the small Mechanicsville house she'd called home for 3 years. Her 13-year-old brother, Zaire, pressed against her side, both of them soaked to the bone. Through the window, she could see her mother, Diane, standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, face turned away. Beside her stood Curtis, the man who'd moved in 8 months ago and somehow convinced her mother that Imani was someone she wasn't. "Mama, please," Imani called through the door, her voice breaking. "I didn't take his money. I swear I didn't." No response, just the sound of rain hammering the roof and Curtis's muffled voice inside, saying words Imani couldn't quite make out but knew were poison. Zaire tugged at her sleeve. "Manny, I'm cold." She looked down at her brother, his thin jacket plastered to his shoulders, his sneakers squishing with water. She was supposed to protect him. That's what she'd always done, ever since their father died when Zaire was 7. She'd been the one who made sure he ate breakfast before school, who helped with homework, who walked him home when Diane worked late shifts at the hospital. And now, because of a lie, they were both standing in a storm with nowhere to go. The door opened a crack. Diane appeared, her eyes red but her jaw set firm. "Imani, you need to leave." "Mama, I didn't." "Curtis found his wallet in your room. $300 gone. Don't lie to me." Imani's chest tightened. "He put it there. I'm telling you, he put it there to make you think." "Enough." Diane's voice cracked like a whip. "I've given you everything. Roof over your head, food, clothes, and this is how you repay me? Stealing from the man who's trying to help us?" "Help us?" Imani's voice rose despite herself. "Mama, he doesn't even let Zaire eat dinner until he's done. He makes you cry when he thinks we're asleep. Why can't you see what he's doing?" Curtis appeared behind Diane, his hand settling possessively on her shoulder. He was a tall man, mid-40s, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Diane, baby, you don't have to do this. Let her stay. We can work through it." The false kindness in his voice made Imani's stomach turn. This was his game. Make himself look generous while positioning her as the problem. Diane shook her head. "No, she's old enough to understand consequences. Imani, you can come back when you're ready to apologize and return what you took." "But I don't have it because I didn't take it." The door closed. The deadbolt clicked into place. Imani stood there, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. Zaire was crying openly now, his thin shoulders shaking. "Where are we going to go?" he whispered. She didn't have an answer. She was 15 years old with $43 in her pocket, a cell phone with 12% battery, and a brother who depended on her. No other family in the city. Her grandmother had passed 2 years ago, and her father's people had scattered across the country after his death. "Come on," she said finally, taking Zaire's hand. "We'll figure it out." They walked through the downpour, feet splashing through puddles, heading toward the only place Imani could think of, the public library on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. It stayed open until 8 on weekdays. They could get dry, charge her phone, and she could think. The warmth of the library hit them like a wall when they pushed through the doors. A security guard looked up, took in their sewed clothes and desperate faces, but said nothing. Imani led Zaire to the back corner, to a table hidden behind the reference section where they could sit without drawing attention. She plugged in her phone, then went to the bathroom and returned with paper towels. They dried off as best they could, Zaire shivering despite the building's heat. "Are we going back home?" he asked quietly. Imani looked at her brother, at his trusting eyes, and felt something harden in her chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, more certain. Not tonight. She opened her phone, scrolling through contacts. Her best friend, Keisha, lived in a one-bedroom with her grandmother and 4 siblings. No room there. Her cousin, Jamal, was away at college. Her old neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had moved last year. Then she saw a name she hadn't thought about in months. Octavia Reese. Octavia had been her mentor through a program at school, a woman in her 60s who'd built and sold 2 businesses and now spent her time teaching financial literacy to teenagers. They'd met every Tuesday for 6 months until the program ended in May. Imani had loved those sessions, the way Octavia spoke about money, not as something to be afraid of, but as a tool, a language you could learn to speak fluently. Imani's finger hovered over the number. It was past 7 now. Would Octavia even remember her? Would she think Imani was crazy for calling out of nowhere? But what choice did she have? She pressed dial. The phone rang 3 times. Then a warm, familiar voice answered. "This is Octavia." "Miss Reese?" Imani's voice came out smaller than she intended. "It's Imani Richardson, from the financial literacy program at school." A pause. Then, "Imani, of course I remember you. You're the girl who asked me about compound interest for 20 minutes straight. How are you, sweetheart?" The kindness in her voice nearly broke Imani's composure. I need help. My mom kicked me out, and I have my little brother with me, and I don't know where to go." Another pause, longer this time. "Where are you right now?" "The library on MLK. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. 20 minutes. "Miss Reese, I don't want to." "Imani." Octavia's voice was firm but gentle. "You called me, which means you knew I'd help. So let me. Stay put. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Zaire looked up at her. "Who was that?" "Someone who might help us," Imani said, "just for tonight." But she had no idea that tonight would turn into something neither of them could have imagined. Octavia Reese arrived in exactly 19 minutes, striding through the library doors in a tailored burgundy coat, her silver locks pulled back in an elegant bun. She was shorter than Imani remembered, barely 5'3", but she moved with the kind of presence that made people step aside without thinking. She spotted them immediately and walked over, her eyes taking in their damp clothes and exhausted faces. "Come on," she said simply. "Let's get you warm and fed." In the car, a sleek black sedan that smelled faintly of vanilla, Octavia didn't ask questions. She just drove, jazz playing softly from the speakers, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the rain. They pulled up to a brick townhouse in the West End, lights glowing warm through the windows. Inside, the space was immaculate but lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls and African art adorning every surface. Octavia led them to the guest room, a cozy space with twin beds and its own bathroom. "Shower, put on something dry. There are clothes in the dresser that should fit well enough. And then come down for dinner," she said. "We'll talk after you've eaten." An hour later, Imani and Zaire sat at Octavia's dining table, bowls of homemade chicken stew in front of them. Zaire ate like he hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from the truth. Curtis had a way of making meals uncomfortable, of making them feel like they were taking something they hadn't earned. Octavia waited until they'd finished before she spoke. "Tell me what happened." Imani did. She told her about Curtis moving in, about the gradual changes in her mother, about the wallet planted in her room, about standing in the rain while her mother chose a man over her own children. Octavia listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When Imani finished, she nodded slowly. "And what do you want to do now?" The question caught Imani off guard. Not, "What are you going to do?" but "What do you want to do?" As if she had agency, as if she had choices. "I don't want to go back," Imani said quietly. "Not while he's there. Not while she won't listen." "Okay." Octavia leaned back in her chair. "Here's what I can offer. You and Zaire can stay here. I have the space, and Lord knows this house is too quiet most days. But there are conditions." Imani tensed. There were always conditions. You stay in school, Octavia continued. Both of you. Your grades don't slip. You help around the house, cook, clean, contribute, and Imani, you work with me. I'm starting a new business venture, and I need someone smart, someone hungry. You'll learn everything I know about building wealth, about contracts, about seeing opportunities where other people see obstacles. You'll work hard, harder than you've ever worked. In exchange, you'll have a roof, food, safety, and an education most people never get. Do we have a deal? Imani looked at this woman who barely knew her, who was offering her not just shelter but a future. Why? She whispered, "Why would you do this?" Octavia smiled, and it was sad and knowing at once. Because 30 years ago, I was you. Different circumstances, same desperation. Someone gave me a chance, and I spent my whole life paying it forward. Now it's your turn to receive it, and one day, it'll be your turn to give it. So, do we have a deal? Imani glanced at Zaire, who was looking at her with hope for the first time that night. She turned back to Octavia and extended her hand. We have a deal. They shook on it. And in that moment, Imani Richardson's life split into two distinct paths, the girl she'd been that morning and the woman she was about to become. What neither of them knew was that this handshake would set in motion a chain of events that would transform Imani from a homeless teenager into one of the youngest self-made billionaires in American history. But that story was still being written, one choice at a time. The first 3 months at Octavia's house were the hardest and most transformative of Imani's life. She woke every morning at 5:30, helped Zaire get ready for school, then dove into her own classes at Frederick Douglass High School. Her teachers noticed the change immediately. The girl who'd been quietly brilliant but distracted was now laser-focused, asking questions that went beyond the curriculum, staying after class to understand concepts more deeply. But the real education happened after school. Every day at 4 o'clock, Imani would sit at Octavia's dining table and the lessons would begin. Not the sanitized version of business taught in schools, but the raw, unfiltered truth about how wealth was built and protected. Money is just a tool, Octavia said one afternoon, spreading financial statements across the table. But like any tool, you need to know how to use it. Most people work for money their whole lives. Smart people make money work for them. Tell me, what's the difference? Imani studied the papers, her mind working. Assets versus income. Income pays for today, assets pay forever. Close. Income pays for today if you're lucky. Assets build generational wealth if you're strategic. Let me show you something. Octavia pulled out her laptop and opened a presentation she'd clearly prepared in advance. I'm acquiring a company. Small logistics firm, been around for 30 years, family-owned, struggling because the founder's children don't want to run it. They're selling for $4 million. The company generates $800,000 in annual profit. Tell me, is that a good deal? Imani did the math in her head. If it generates $800,000 a year, you'd make your money back in 5 years. After that, it's pure profit. But that's assuming the business stays stable. Good. Now tell me what you do to make sure it grows instead of stays stable. This was harder. Imani thought about everything Octavia had taught her about market analysis, about operational efficiency, about finding waste and turning it into opportunity. I'd look at their routes. Logistics is about optimization. Maybe they're using outdated software, or maybe they're not maximizing their fleet. I'd also look at their client base. Are they diversified, or are they dependent on 1 or 2 major contracts? Octavia smiled, the kind of smile a teacher reserves for a student who's just grasped something profound. You just described exactly what my team found. The company uses paper manifests and manual routing. They have 6 trucks that sit idle 3 days a week, and 70% of their revenue comes from one client. Now, knowing that, would you still buy it? Imani hesitated. If you can fix those things, yes. But if the major client leaves, you're in trouble. Unless you secure the client before you close the deal, which is exactly what we did. Signed a 5-year contract at better terms for both sides. Then we implement digital systems, optimize the routing, and sell the excess capacity to new clients. Year 1, we'll be at $1.2 million in profit. Year 3, we'll double the company's value and either keep it or sell it for $8 million. Turn 4 into 8 in 3 years. That's how you build. Imani leaned forward, her eyes bright. Can I see the actual numbers? The real financial statements? That's why you're here. Octavia pushed the laptop toward her. Study these. Tell me what else you see that I might have missed. And Imani, don't hold back. I'm paying you to think, not to agree with me. You're paying me? Did I forget to mention that? Octavia pulled an envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. $500 a week. You're an analyst now. This is your first paycheck. Open it. Inside was a check and a letter on official letterhead. Richardson Reese Consulting, Junior Analyst, Imani Richardson. Imani stared at it, her throat tight. Why Richardson Reese? Because you're not my charity case. You're my partner. One day, you'll buy me out, and it'll just be Richardson. But for now, we build together. Don't make me regret this, young lady. Make me proud. Imani did both. Over the next 2 years, she absorbed everything. She learned how to read between the lines of financial statements, how to spot businesses that were undervalued because they were poorly managed rather than fundamentally broken. She learned negotiation, not the aggressive kind, but the strategic kind, where both parties walked away feeling like they'd won. She learned about contracts, about liability structures, about the difference between being rich and being wealthy, and slowly she began to see opportunities everywhere. At 16, she noticed that the corner store near school was always packed but never seemed to make money. She spent a week observing, then wrote a proposal for the owner, reorganized the layout to increase impulse purchases, negotiate better terms with suppliers, and add a small cafe section that would draw the morning crowd. The owner was skeptical but desperate. Imani offered to implement it for 10% of any profit increase over 6 months. 3 months later, revenue was up 40%. Her cut was $8,000. She put $7,000 into an investment account Octavia helped her set up. The other $1,000 went to Zaire for new school supplies and clothes. He'd grown 3 inches and needed everything. At 17, she identified a pattern. Small Black-owned businesses in Atlanta were struggling not because they lacked customers, but because they lacked access to capital and operational support. Banks wouldn't lend to them. Traditional consulting firms were too expensive. They were trapped in a cycle of barely surviving. What if we created a firm that specialized in them? Imani said to Octavia one evening. Not charity, real business. We take equity stakes in exchange for restructuring and growth support. We help them scale, then either keep the equity or sell it. They get expertise and capital without crushing debt. We get returns. Everyone wins. Octavia set down her tea and looked at Imani for a long moment. That's not a small idea, Imani. That's a venture fund. I know, and I think we could do it. We'd need capital, real capital, at least $2 million to start properly. The logistics company you bought? Didn't you say someone approached you about buying it? Octavia nodded slowly. Offered $6.5 million. I was going to hold it longer. Sell it. Use the profit to fund the new venture. This is bigger, Miss Reese. This could change everything for people who look like us. Octavia was quiet for so long that Imani thought she'd overstepped. Then Octavia stood, walked to her office, and returned with a bottle of sparkling cider and 2 glasses. She poured, handed one to Imani, and raised hers in a toast. To Richardson Reese Capital, let's change the damn game. They sold the logistics company for $6.8 million. After taxes and paying off the initial acquisition debt, they had $3.2 million in liquid capital. Octavia contributed another $800,000 from her personal savings, $4 million to start. Imani was 17 years old and about to become a venture capitalist. The first deal nearly broke them. A small manufacturing company in West End, owned by a man named Vernon Tucker, made custom furniture, beautiful work, handcrafted pieces that sold for thousands of dollars each. But Vernon was drowning in debt, couldn't pay his workers on time, and was 3 months from closing. Imani spent 2 weeks analyzing his business. The problem wasn't the product or the demand. It was inefficiency. Vernon was a master craftsman, but a terrible businessman. He underpriced his work, overcommitted on timelines, and had no inventory management system. His books were kept in a spiral notebook. We can fix this, Imani told Octavia. But he needs to give up control of operations. He needs to stay in the workshop and let us run the business side. That's a hard conversation. Men like Vernon, they've built everything themselves. Asking them to step back feels like failure. Then we frame it differently. We tell him he's spreading himself too thin, that his genius is in the craft, not the paperwork. We free him to do what he does best. The conversation was exactly as hard as Octavia predicted. Vernon was proud, defensive, raw from years of stress. But Imani didn't push. She listened. She asked questions. She showed him financial projections, not to intimidate, but to illuminate. By the end of the meeting, Vernon was crying. "I'm so tired," he whispered. "I love making furniture, but I hate everything else. I hate fighting with suppliers, chasing payments, wondering if I can make payroll. I just want to build things." "Then let us handle the rest," Imani said gently. "You build, we'll manage everything else. And in 3 years, you'll own a profitable company again, free and clear." They restructured everything, raised prices to reflect the true value of the work, implemented project management software, negotiated better terms with suppliers, built a website that showcased Vernon's artistry, created a waiting list that added perceived value and allowed them to control production flow. Within 6 months, the company was profitable. Within a year, they'd tripled revenue. Within 2 years, Vernon bought back their equity stake for twice what they'd invested, and he did it with tears of gratitude streaming down his face. "You gave me my life back," he said. But for Imani, it was more than a successful deal. It was proof of concept. They could do this. They could scale it. Over the next 3 years, Richardson Reese Capital invested in 12 companies. Not all succeeded, but 8 thrived. A bakery that expanded into catering and tripled revenue. A hair salon that franchised into 3 locations. A tech startup that built scheduling software for barbershops and beauty salons, which they eventually sold to a larger company for $4 million. A construction firm that specialized in sustainable, affordable housing and landed government contracts. Their portfolio value grew from $4 million to $42 million. Imani graduated high school as valedictorian, turned down full rides to Harvard and Stanford, and instead focused full-time on the business. She was 20 years old and already wealthy by most standards. But she wanted more, not for greed, for proof. Proof that a girl kicked out in a storm could build an empire. Proof that the mother who'd chosen a man over her daughter had made the biggest mistake of her life. Diane had tried to reach out twice over the years. Once when Imani was 16, once when she was 19. Both times, Imani had sent the same response through Octavia's lawyer. Contact not desired at this time. She wasn't ready. Maybe she'd never be ready. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Zaire, now 16 himself and thriving at a private school Imani paid for, had a different relationship with her mother. He visited occasionally, maintaining a cautious connection that Imani neither encouraged nor discouraged. She'd learned that forgiveness was personal, and she wouldn't force her trauma onto her brother. Curtis, she'd learned through Zaire, had left Diane 2 years after kicking them out. Moved on to another woman with more money. Left Diane with debt and broken promises. Karma, Imani thought, though it brought her less satisfaction than she'd expected. Revenge, she discovered, was cold comfort compared to success. At 21, Imani saw the opportunity that would change everything. A mid-sized real estate development company, Meridian Properties, was quietly being shopped around. The founder had passed away, and his children wanted to cash out. The company was valued at $75 million, owned significant property throughout Atlanta, and had development rights for several key parcels in emerging neighborhoods. It was too big for Richardson Reese Capital to acquire alone. But Imani had an idea. "We don't buy it," she told Octavia. "We partner. We find institutional investors who want exposure to Atlanta real estate but don't have local expertise. We bring them in as limited partners, we maintain operational control, and we scale this into something massive. You're talking about raising serious capital. We need to pitch to people who've never heard of us. Then we make them hear us." Imani spent 6 months preparing. She built financial models that projected 15-year returns. She researched every major institutional investor with interests in urban development. She created a pitch deck that was simultaneously data-driven and visionary, showing not just profit potential but social impact, demonstrating how revitalizing Black neighborhoods could be both morally right and financially lucrative. She practiced her pitch until she could deliver it in her sleep. Octavia watched her rehearse hundreds of times, offering feedback, pushing her to anticipate every possible question, every objection. Finally, they were ready. Their first 10 meetings were rejections, polite but firm. Too young, too inexperienced, too risky. Imani absorbed each one, refined her approach, and kept going. The 11th meeting was with Pinnacle Investment Group, a firm managing $18 billion in assets. The partner who met with them, a woman named Angela Whitfield listened to the entire 30-minute pitch without interrupting. When Imani finished, Angela leaned back in her chair. "How old are you?" 21. "And you're asking me to commit $50 million based on your track record of small business investments and a compelling PowerPoint?" Imani didn't flinch. "No. I'm asking you to commit $50 million based on market analysis that shows Atlanta real estate will appreciate 40% over the next decade, based on development rights worth twice what we're paying for them, and based on the fact that every single business we've touched has either doubled in value or exited profitably. My age is irrelevant. My results aren't." Angela smiled. "Walk me through the risk mitigation again. The part about affordable housing requirements?" Imani did. For another hour, they went back and forth, Angela probing every assumption, Imani defending every projection with data and logic. Finally, Angela stood and extended her hand. "I'll bring this to my partners. Expect a call within 2 weeks." The call came in 9 days. Pinnacle committed $40 million. With Richardson Reese Capital's $10 million and additional investments from 2 other firms, they closed the Meridian Properties acquisition for $85 million. Imani Richardson, at 21 years old, now controlled a real estate portfolio worth over $200 million. And she was just getting started. The Meridian Properties acquisition transformed everything. Within 18 months, Imani had repositioned the company from a traditional landlord into a comprehensive urban development firm. She identified underutilized properties, rezoned where possible, and created mixed-use developments that combined affordable housing with commercial spaces for Black-owned businesses. The model was brilliant in its simplicity. Create ecosystems where communities could live, work, and thrive without displacement. The financial returns were extraordinary. Property values in their developments appreciated 53% in 2 years. Commercial occupancy rates hit 97%. The affordable housing units, which skeptics had warned would drag down profits, actually increased overall property values by anchoring communities and attracting city incentives and tax credits. By 23, Imani had expanded beyond Atlanta. She replicated the model in Charlotte, then Memphis, then Birmingham. Each city followed the same blueprint. Identify neglected neighborhoods with strong bones. Acquire strategically, develop thoughtfully, and ensure the people who'd lived there for generations could afford to stay. Richardson Reese Capital became Richardson Reese Holdings, a billion-dollar enterprise with divisions in real estate, private equity, and venture capital. Octavia, now 72, had stepped back from daily operations but remained chairman of the board. Imani was CEO, and her face began appearing in Forbes, Fortune, and Black Enterprise. The youngest Black woman to build a billion-dollar company from scratch? The headlines read, "From homeless teenager to real estate mogul in 8 years." The press loved the narrative. Imani tolerated it. She did interviews when necessary, always redirecting attention to the businesses they'd helped, the communities they'd revitalized, the generational wealth they were helping families build. She never mentioned her mother, never mentioned Curtis, never mentioned the rain-soaked night that had started everything, until the day her mother showed up at her office. Imani was in a meeting with her development team, reviewing plans for a new project in Nashville, when her assistant, Brianna, knocked softly on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says she's your mother." The room went silent. Everyone on Imani's team knew pieces of her story, the parts she'd shared in interviews, the sanitized version. But they also knew she'd built walls around her past, walls that nobody dared breach. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day," Imani said, her voice steady. "I did. She said she'll wait." Imani looked at the faces around the table, all carefully neutral. She closed her laptop. "We'll resume this afternoon, 2 o'clock. The team filed out quickly, grateful to escape the tension. Imani sat alone for a moment, breathing slowly, centering herself. Then she walked to the lobby. Diane Richardson sat in one of the sleek modern chairs, hands folded in her lap, looking small and out of place among the glass and steel of the Richardson Reese Holdings headquarters. She'd aged more than 8 years should account for. Gray had overtaken her hair, lines had deepened around her eyes and mouth, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost more battles than she'd won. She stood when Imani approached, her eyes filling immediately. "Imani, you need to leave," Imani said quietly. "Please, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. You don't get to ask me for anything." Imani's voice was calm, controlled, each word precisely placed. You had years to ask. You chose not to. I was wrong. Diane's voice broke. I was so wrong, baby. I know that now. I knew it then, but I was too proud, too stubborn, too afraid to admit it. Afraid of what? Admitting that you chose a man who was using you over the daughter who loved you? That you threw your own children into a storm because you couldn't see what was right in front of you? Tears streamed down Diane's face. He manipulated me. He made me think. No. Imani cut her off. He didn't make you do anything. He gave you a choice, and you chose him. You chose comfort over truth. You chose pride over your children. Own that. Diane nodded, sobbing openly now. You're right. You're absolutely right. I chose wrong, and I've lived with that every single day since. Imani, I lost everything. My job, my home, my dignity. But none of that compares to what I lost when I lost you and Zaire. Please, I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for a chance to what? Imani's eyes were dry, her voice steady. To be in my life now that I'm successful? To benefit from what I've built after you threw me away when I had nothing? No. God, no. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, that I see you, that I'm so incredibly proud of what you've become, even though I had nothing to do with it. Especially because I had nothing to do with it. You did this despite me, not because of me, and that makes it even more remarkable. Imani studied her mother's face, looking for the woman she'd once known, the woman who'd braided her hair on Sunday mornings and sang off-key to Anita Baker while cooking dinner. That woman was still there, somewhere beneath the mistakes and regrets, but she felt like a stranger now. I appreciate you saying that, Imani said finally, but I'm not ready. I may never be ready. What you did broke something in me that I've spent 8 years rebuilding. I can't let you near that foundation until I'm certain it's strong enough to withstand you. Diane nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue she'd clutched in her hand. I understand. Can I just tell you one thing before I go? Imani waited. That night, after you left, I went to your room. I was looking for something, anything that would prove Curtis right, that would justify what I'd done. Instead, I found your journal. You'd written about wanting to make me proud, about working hard in school so you could go to college and help me retire early. You'd written about how much you loved Zaire, how you wanted to protect him from everything that had hurt you. And I realized I'd just destroyed the most beautiful, loving soul I'd ever known. I tried to find you. I called everyone, but you were gone, and I knew I deserved to lose you. She stood, preparing to leave. You don't owe me anything, Imani. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even acknowledgement. But I needed you to know that what happened that night was the worst mistake of my life, and I will carry that until the day I die. You deserved better. You deserved everything. And somehow, despite me, you gave yourself everything. That's not in spite of your strength. That's because of it. She walked toward the elevator, her footsteps echoing in the marble lobby. Imani watched her go, feeling something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but shifting, like tectonic plates finding new positions. Wait! Imani called out. Diane turned, hope and fear warring on her face. Zaire's having a birthday dinner next month. He's turning 18. If you want to come, I'll allow it. Not for you, for him. He's maintained a relationship with you, and I won't punish him for choosing differently than I did. But understand this, you're on probation. One misstep, one moment where you center yourself over him or try to take credit for who we've become, and you're gone, permanently. Do you understand? Diane nodded, tears flowing again, but she was smiling. I understand. Thank you, Imani. Thank you. After she left, Imani stood in the lobby for a long time, staring at nothing. Brianna approached cautiously. Are you okay? I don't know, Imani said honestly. Ask me in a few years. The birthday dinner was awkward, but not disastrous. Diane arrived with a gift for Zaire, a watch that had belonged to their father, and she cried when he hugged her. She asked questions about their lives, but didn't pry. She complimented Imani's success, but didn't claim any part of it. She was careful, humble, genuine in her regret. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a beginning. Over the next 2 years, Diane became a peripheral figure in their lives. She attended holidays at Octavia's house, where Imani still considered home. She came to Zaire's high school graduation and his college orientation at Morehouse. She and Imani had lunch occasionally, conversations that were polite but guarded, both of them navigating the wreckage of what had been and the uncertainty of what could be. Meanwhile, Imani's empire continued to grow. At 25, Richardson Reese Holdings was valued at $3.2 billion. She'd expanded into 13 cities, developed over 40 mixed-use properties, and her portfolio companies employed more than 8,000 people. She'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of the world's most influential young leaders. But the moment that mattered most came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, exactly 10 years after the night she'd been kicked out. Imani stood on the steps of a new community center in Mechanicsville, the Atlanta neighborhood where she'd grown up. The building had been abandoned for years, a shell of broken windows and graffiti. Richardson Reese Holdings had acquired it, renovated it completely, and transformed it into a hub offering financial literacy classes, business incubators for aspiring entrepreneurs, after-school programs for kids, and workforce development training for adults. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew hundreds of people. Local politicians gave speeches. Community leaders offered thanks. And then Imani stepped to the microphone. She looked out at the crowd, at faces that looked like hers, at children who reminded her of who she'd been, at parents struggling the way her mother had struggled. She saw Octavia in the front row, Zaire beside her, both beaming with pride. She saw Diane in the back, trying to make herself small, tears already streaming down her face. 10 years ago, Imani began, I stood 3 blocks from here in a rainstorm with my little brother, homeless, scared, and convinced that the world had decided I didn't matter. I was 15 years old, and I thought my life was over before it had really begun. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But I was wrong. My life wasn't over. It was beginning. Because sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways. Painful doorways. Devastating doorways. Doorways we'd never choose for ourselves, but doorways nonetheless, leading us toward versions of ourselves we never knew existed. She paused, collecting herself. This center exists because I remember what it feels like to have nothing, to be dismissed, to be told you're not worthy, and I wanted to create a place that tells a different story. This building says, you matter. Your dreams matter. Your potential matters. And if you're willing to work, if you're willing to learn, if you're willing to believe in yourself, even when nobody else does, we will stand with you. The applause was thunderous. Imani cut the ribbon, and people flooded inside, exploring the computer labs, the meeting rooms, the small business offices available for free to local entrepreneurs. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Diane approached slowly. Can I talk to you for a minute? They walked to a quiet corner, away from the celebration. Diane looked at the building, then at her daughter. Do you remember what I said to you that night, when I told you to leave? Imani did. Every word was burned into her memory. I said you were nothing but trouble, that you were stealing from hardworking people, that you needed to learn consequences. Diane's voice shook. I want you to know that every single word was a lie born from my own weakness. You were never trouble. You were exceptional. You were working 2 jobs while getting straight A's. You were raising your brother while I was too blind to see it. And that night, you didn't steal anything except the life you deserve from the ashes I created. She took a deep breath. I also want you to know that I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not asking for that, but I am asking if you'll let me be part of what you're building here. Not as your mother, not in any special role, just as a volunteer. I want to help other women avoid the mistakes I made. I want to teach mothers how to see their children, really see them, before it's too late. Would you let me do that? Imani studied her mother's face, seeing something she hadn't seen before. Genuine humility. Not performance, not manipulation, but real brokenness that had been carefully put back together into something wiser. Yes, Imani said quietly. On one condition, you tell your story, the real story, including the parts that hurt, because the women who need to hear it won't listen to someone who pretends to be perfect. They'll listen to someone who failed and learned. Can you do that? Diane nodded. I can do that. They stood together in silence, watching people stream into the building, watching hope take physical form. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was something closer to understanding, and maybe that was enough. 3 months later, Forbes published their annual billionaires list. Imani Richardson appeared for the first time. Net worth $2.1 billion. The youngest self-made black woman billionaire in American history. The article detailed her journey from that rainy night in Mechanicsville to the empire she'd built. It quoted Octavia saying, Imani didn't just build a company, she built a blueprint for how wealth can heal communities instead of extracting from them. It quoted business leaders who called her a visionary, politicians who praised her commitment to affordable housing, entrepreneurs who credited her with saving their businesses. But Imani's favorite quote came from Vernon Tucker, the furniture maker from her first deal. "She saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." That's her gift. She sees what could be, not just what is. The magazine arrived on a Thursday. Imani held it in her office, staring at her photo on the cover, and felt nothing like triumph. Instead, she felt quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you've built something that will outlast you. Her phone buzzed. A text from Zaire. "That's my sister on the cover of Forbes. Told y'all she was going to change the world." Then Octavia. "Proud doesn't begin to cover it, baby girl. Your ancestors are celebrating." Then, unexpectedly, "Diane, I failed you as a mother, but you succeeded anyway. Not because of me, but despite me. That makes this even more beautiful. Love you, even though I don't deserve to say it." Imani set down the phone and walked to her office window, looking out over Atlanta's skyline. Somewhere out there, a girl was standing in a storm, thinking her life was over. Somewhere, a mother was making a choice she'd regret forever. Somewhere, a dreamer was wondering if hope was foolish. She picked up her phone and typed out a response to all three messages. "I love you all. See you Sunday for dinner." Then she returned to her desk and opened the proposal for Richardson Reese Holdings' next project, a $100 million fund specifically designed to support Black women entrepreneurs under 25. Because if Imani Richardson had learned anything in her 25 years, it was this. Sometimes you have to be the door you wish someone had opened for you. And sometimes the cruelest moment of your life is actually the beginning of your greatest story. You just have to be brave enough to walk through the storm and build on the other side. Viewers, do you think Imani made the right choice letting her mother back into her life? Would you have done the same? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories of triumph against impossible odds. Where are you watching from? Let me know.